3 Nephi 1 through 7. It's been 5 years since Samuel the Lamanite testified about the sign of Jesus' birth, promising that there would be a day, a night, and a day with absolutely no darkness. And even though there are still miracles happening and other signs that Christ really is going to come, the big sign hasn't happened yet. And this is just the best thing in the world to the unbelievers. They are giddy with delight, thinking that they're right and the believers are wrong. But rather than simply pat themselves on the back, they decide to really up the ante here. They decide that on a specific day, they're going to kill everyone who believes in the sign. Now, this isn't an official act of the government. The chief judge and governor is a really awesome, good guy named Lyconius, but it's widespread enough that everyone finds out about it. And the believers are understandably scared. They're getting really, really nervous. And the new high priest, Nephi's son Nephi. Now, as an aside here, Nephi left one day and just never came back. We have no idea what happened to him, but my opinion is that he was translated because before he disappeared, Nephi the elder gave his son Nephi the younger the responsibility for the scriptural record and other sacred things. But anyway, Nephi the younger, who is now leading the church, is beside himself. He's absolutely heartbroken. And so he prays all day long for his people. He is begging the Lord for help. It's likely that Nephi isn't nervous about the good people dying. He knows where they're going to end up. But what will happen to the Nephites who are left behind? It will be only the wicked Nephites left behind, and what will happen to their people? And then something pretty amazing happens. It's always struck me as significant. He hears the voice of the Lord, and this is what he hears. It's in 3 Nephi chapter 1, verse 13. Lift up your head and be of good cheer. For behold, the time is at hand, and on this night shall the sign be given. And on the morrow come I into the world. Which, if you think about it, surely Jesus had plenty to do on the day before he was going to be born into mortality. Surely there were meetings to attend and angels to organize. But he takes the time to comfort Nephi that the sign is coming in just a few hours. And I love that reminder of how very generous and loving our Savior is. So as promised, the sign comes that very night. The sun goes down just as expected, but there's no sunset. It doesn't get any darker when the sun goes away. It just stays light. And you can imagine how the unbelievers are feeling. They fall down as if they're dead. In fact, everyone across the entire land falls to the ground. This is unbelievable. Like, imagine if this happened to you. You watch the sun lowering and it's gone. The sun is well and truly gone. But the sky is somehow just as bright as it was at noonday. It's absolutely shocking. Well, the sun comes back up the next morning and they all know this is the day Jesus will be born. And this whole thing is so fantastic and so amazing that they actually change how they reckon time. They'd been counting their time based on when the reign of the judges started, but they scratch all that and they start reckoning time from when the sign of Jesus' birth came. This was a big deal. Now, at this point, Satan really goes to work on the people. He doesn't want them focused on Jesus. And so he starts convincing some of the people that these signs and wonders are no big deal. But still, the majority of the Nephites aren't swayed and they fully believe in Jesus. And there's general peace for the next few years, except for a little problem called the Gadianton robbers. The Gadianton robbers are still holed up in the mountains, coming out every once in a while to plunder and murder, and they're growing stronger. As the years continue, there are more and more Nephite dissenters who join them. And the Lamanites are struggling too because the younger generation is being deceived and flattered into joining the Gadianton robbers as well. And so for the next 10 or so years, there becomes an increasing division among the Nephites. There are incredibly righteous people who are preaching and prophesying of Jesus Christ, but on the other hand, there are thousands of Nephites who are trying to explain away the miracles and the signs and wonders by saying that they were done by the power of the devil. And so they ignore those signs and they become more and more wicked. At this point, it's the 13th year since the sign of Christ's birth, and the Gadianton robber problem is getting really, really bad. Even though most of the Nephites aren't righteous, they're still working their typical jobs, trying to raise their families in peace. But the Gadianton robbers thrive on plundering and murdering. And so for the general populace of Nephites and Lamanites, they pose a really big problem. No matter how wicked these people are, they still don't want these ruffians coming in and messing with their lives. And so the Nephites and Lamanites joined forces in a war against these robbers. And they have some success over the next couple of years. They're able to drive the robbers into the mountains. But the problem is the people don't have God's protection. They're wicked. They've turned their backs on God. And so they're fighting with just their own strength. And unfortunately for them, the more wicked they become, the more advantage the Gadianton robbers gain over them. So it's now the 16th year since the sign of Christ's birth, and the governor Laconius receives an absolutely audacious letter from Giddianhi, the governor of the Gadianton robbers. Basically, in this letter, Giddianhi says, Laconius, you're doing such a great job with what you have. It's really a pity that you're fighting against me. Why don't you join me? We know you guys are in the wrong. You've wronged us poor Gadianton robbers in so many ways, but we'll overlook that and let you join us. But if you choose not to join us, we'll destroy you. And Laconius is completely astonished at Giddianhi's audacity. He knows that these robbers have never been wronged. And so rather than reply to this ridiculous letter, he goes into action and he does 3 really powerful things. First, he tells his people to start praying. He knows that their greatest strength has nothing to do with their military and everything to do with their willingness to repent. Second, he sends a proclamation among all his people to gather together. He wants them to bring their herds, their crops, all their possessions, and come and live in a small area between Zarahemla and Bountiful, and be ready to stay there for the next 7 years while they starve out the Gadianton robbers. And third, he appoints a new chief captain named Gidgadoni and has him start building fortifications that are to be guarded by their soldiers, who are also kitted out with weapons and defensive armor. And this plan of Laconius's ends up working really, really well because the people do what he's asked. They gather, they start repenting, and they prepare to defend themselves. So the next year, the robbers come out of their hiding places in the mountains, and they're probably pretty excited to see all these empty cities, like free land, right? So they take possession of the cities, but quickly realize they've got a big problem. The Nephites have left nothing to plunder. There are no crops, no possessions, no animals, and so they have to go back to the mountains to find food. But they don't like this. Their preferred method of providing for their families is plundering and robbing and murdering. And so their leader, Giddianhi, rallies his men and prepares them for battle against this great body of gathered Nephites. And when they come out to battle, their appearance is truly terrifying. They're wearing just lamb skin around their loins and then head plates, and the rest of their bodies are dyed in blood. So creepy. And when the Nephites see the Gadianton robbers, they immediately fall to their knees and start praying to God for deliverance. Now, this is a total spiritual power move on their part. They know that if they're going to win this battle, it'll be because of the Lord. But the Gadianton robbers don't see it that way. They see the Nephites have fallen to the earth, and they assume that they're terrified. And so the robbers give a great shout of joy, and they pick up their pace to come attack. However, the Nephites are ready for them in the strength of the Lord, and they fight the Gadianton robbers in the biggest and bloodiest battle that has ever been fought in the over 600-year history of the Nephites. This is a hard battle that must have lasted for hours and hours and hours, if not days. But the Nephites are victorious, and the Gadianton robbers start running. But even though they must have been exhausted, the Nephites don't want to let the robbers escape. And so they run after them and they kill as many as they can overtake, including Giddianhi. At this point, the Nephites return to their stronghold in Zarahemla/Bountiful, and the robbers who have escaped retreat to the mountains and don't come to battle against them for about 2 years. And we have to assume that they're spending most of their time hunting and trying to find a way to survive without plundering. But after 2 years, they're desperate. And you might be wondering, why don't they just go live in an empty Nephite city and start growing crops and raising animals? Well, they might have thought of that, but they also would have realized that that would make them an easy prey for the Nephite armies. The robbers thrived on hiding and secrecy, and so they had to stay in the mountains. But by this point, they have killed almost all the animals in the wilderness, and the robbers are at the point of starving to death. And so their new leader, Zemnariah, decides on a scheme. They're going to lay siege on the Nephites, surrounding them completely so that they are cut off from the outside world. And they're likely hoping that when the Nephites realize they can't get supplies from the outside world, they'll just give up and surrender to the Gadianton robbers. But this doesn't work out quite the way they'd hoped, because the Nephites have, you'll remember from before, laid up enough provisions to last them for 7 years. So these robbers are surrounding them. They're at the point of starving to death. They have hardly any provisions, and the Nephite armies come out during the day and fight and kill them by the tens of thousands. It's a complete disaster for the Gadianton robbers because they're still starving, and now there are even less of them. Well, Zemnariah sees that his plan isn't working, so he comes up with a different one. Instead of laying siege on the Nephites, they're just going to move north past them into the land of desolation, where hopefully there will be more animals for them to eat. But somehow the Nephite general Gidgiddoni finds out about Zemnarihah's plan. We're not told if it was revealed by the Lord or if he had spies, but somehow he knows. So he sends out the Nephite army at night, and when the Gadianton robbers start heading north, they find themselves surrounded by Nephite soldiers. And this is the pivotal point in the war. The Gadianton robbers have nowhere to go. They're starving, they're desperate, and so thousands of them simply lay down their weapons and are taken prisoner, which probably sounded like a great option because at least as a prisoner you'd get regular meals. But there are still a lot of the robbers who refuse to give up, who are killed. And their leader, Zemnarihah, is hanged from a tree. Now, once Zemnarihah is dead, the Nephites chop the tree down and the people cheer because this is the beginning of the end of the Gadianton robbers. They have killed or taken prisoner every single robber, and they are so grateful to God for delivering them. This is a great point in their history where they are humble, they recognize God's part in their freedom, and they are almost completely free of Gadianton robbers. So we're now in the 22nd year since the sign of Christ's birth, and this was a time of serious growth and strength for the Nephites. 3 Nephi chapter 5 verse 1 says, "There was not a living soul among all the people of the Nephites who did doubt in the least the words of all the holy prophets." The people believed Christ had come. They believed in the signs. They gave up all their sins and they started serving God full time. These were not Sunday Christians. They were fully converted. And they wanted to convert the Gadianton robbers they held prisoner. They didn't just leave them to languish in prison. They preached the gospel to them. And surprisingly, a lot of them converted. They repented and promised never to murder again, and they were set free. But there were also a lot of them who would not be converted. They still held on to their little Gadianton robber dreams, and they were dealt with by the law, probably put to death. So at this point, there are literally no more Gadianton robbers in the land. The Nephites don't just have them under control, they have eliminated the problem, and things are great for the next 4 years. So it's now the 26th year since the sign of Christ's coming, and the Nephites have been gathered together for almost 9 years. But at this point, when the Gadianton robber problem is well and truly solved, they start returning to their own lands. Everyone takes all their flocks, their cattle, their horses, and they've even got leftover provisions, and they head home. And they even make sure that these Gadianton robbers who have made covenants of peace, that they're taken care of and they have a way to provide for themselves. So the Nephites start filling in the land again, and they are on a mission to fix things up. You can imagine the Gadianton robbers have probably done some damage, as well as just things being left to the elements for almost 9 years. There's definitely work to be done. So they're repairing these old cities, they start building new ones, they fix the highways and build new ones. And life is good for the Nephites until we get to year 29. Because things have been so good for the past 3 years, some of the people start feeling just a little bit prideful. They've become really successful merchants or lawyers or whatever, and they're proud of how smart and how wealthy they are. In the meantime, there are other people who are just humble workers who don't have lots of money or opportunities to learn. And so because of the pride of these wealthy and well-educated Nephites, there starts to be a social division among the people, which unfortunately leads to a spiritual division in the church. And you can tell that Satan is hard at work on these people, and unfortunately it's working so well that the church is basically totally broken throughout all the land within the space of just a year or so. The people are in open rebellion against God, knowing full well what they're doing. And the only exception is the Lamanite converts who will not leave their covenants, and a very few righteous Nephites. These guys are awesome, but the rest of the people are a spiritual disaster. Now, these people are about 4 years away from Christ coming to visit, but they don't realize that. However, there are prophets who know, and they start testifying to the people about Jesus Christ and calling them to repent. Well, the Nephites in high places, specifically the lawyers, the judges, the high priests, are not having it. They want to get rid of these prophets ASAP. But they know that they can't use legal measures to get rid of the prophets because the governor is a righteous guy. And so instead of bringing the prophets up on some sort of false charges, the prophets just start to disappear. They're being picked off one by one. However, someone notices what's happening and issues a complaint with Governor Lyconius in Zarahemla. And so these murderous judges are taken captive and they're going to be tried for their crimes. But you can probably guess where this is going. The friends and families of these judges don't want to see them punished for their crimes. And so they gather together with the lawyers and the high priests and enter into a covenant to protect each other in their wicked endeavors. They start a new secret combination, and their main goal is to get rid of Lyconius and set up a king over the Nephites. So as their first act as a newly formed secret combination, they kill Lyconius. Now, this has happened before among the Nephites. They've had chief judges be murdered and been able to rally. But for whatever reason, this time it leads to total political and social chaos. The people are completely divided. And for the first time in their history, they actually separate and have no centralized government. They're divided into family tribes. And it doesn't sound like it's small, immediate family tribe. It would be like if my family started a tribe. We would make sure to invite my mom and my sisters and their husbands and their kids, and maybe even my sister's in-laws and my husband's brother and his family and their in-laws. We would want to invite all these people, even if they're not directly related to us, because we wouldn't want to be vulnerable to attack. That's the kind of tribes the Nephites are forming. And while these Nephite tribes aren't united at all, they at least come to an agreement not to go to war with each other, not to attack each other. And so they have a general sort of peace, except for the fact that they will cast out and stone any prophets that come among them. Now remember, going back 28 years after Christ's birth, the Nephites were all good. They were righteous. They were organized. The church was strong. And now it's year 30 and they're a complete disaster. Almost every Nephite is wicked. They're broken into tribes with no centralized government, and there are only a few righteous people among them. Now, this secret combination that started all of this destruction is not satisfied. Sure, they've destroyed the government, but they haven't taken over it. And so they set up a king of the robbers named Jacob, who has big plans to take over the Nephites. He has two problems, though. All the Nephite tribes hate the Gadianton robbers for ruining their government, and they outnumber them. So Jacob, seeing which way the wind is blowing, has his group move up north. He's got big plans to establish his own kingdom there and promises that they'll be joined by thousands of Nephite dissenters, and then they'll go to battle with all these Nephite tribes and take control. Now, amidst all this chaos is Nephi the Younger, who refuses to be silenced on the subject of Jesus. You've got to love this guy. He is just like his dad, who sees a problem and decides he doesn't care how big it is. He's going to tackle it with God as his partner. So he goes among these Nephite tribes and starts preaching to them and performing miracles. He casts out devils. He even raises his brother from the dead after he'd been stoned to death by the people, which sounds great. Surely the people will be converted when they see all of this, right? Wrong. Instead of being amazed and converted, the Nephites are angry because they can't disbelieve Nephi. His words and his actions are so powerful that they can't deny the truth of what he's saying, and they hate it. But Nephi is undeterred. He goes around doing this for 3 years, converting just a few people and trying to reestablish the church among them. And that's where we'll end for this week. So what is the lesson to be learned from these Nephites? I think there are a couple. Number one, we should never assume we're spiritually safe. Satan never gives up on a single one of us, and so we always need to keep our spiritual guard up. The Nephites were living in total righteousness one year, and by the next, the church was completely broken up. So never let your guard down. Second, we can choose to be awesome in the middle of wickedness. Nephi refused to lower himself to the level of his peers. No matter how much they hated him or rejected him, he just focused on doing what God wanted him to do, and we can and should do the same. Now, if you're wondering how we got to this point in the scriptures, make sure to check out this video next.